Sagittarius. Urgent. Hitman on your trail. You'll be shocked who paid him and why Archangel Michael acts. There are moments in life that feel more like warnings whispered through the wind than logical conclusions drawn from evidence. You may not see it clearly, but something inside you already knows. A force is at work behind the scenes, and it's not simply coincidence. Lately, perhaps you've felt the weight of invisible eyes, the quiet tension in your chest, the dreams that left you shaken, or the strange way certain people seem to withdraw without reason. These aren't just random fragments of fear. They are signs. Not meant to scare you but to awaken you. Something ancient is being stirred. Something you felt before but couldn't name. And now it's rising again, not to punish you, but to lead you toward truth and liberation. In this message, you'll come face to face with an unseen energy that has tried to derail your light, but also with the truth of why Archangel Michael is standing guard over your soul. You are not alone, and the protection you've been quietly praying for has already arrived. If this resonates with you, if you feel something unspoken has been pressing against your intuition, stay with me. Like this video if your heart begins to recognize the truth, share it with the soul who needs it most, and subscribe to Zodiac Wisdom, where the unseen becomes visible, and your light is always honored. Gate 1. The one sent to harm you didn't carry a weapon, he carried darkness. Sagittarius, what if the most dangerous enemy you've ever faced never raised their voice, never threw a single stone, never once showed aggression in the way the world typically defines harm? What if instead they entered your life with calmness, with familiarity, with a face that once felt like home? The one sent to derail you did not come bearing weapons. He came cloaked in quiet darkness, the kind that smiles softly, that asks you how you are just enough to keep you doubting your own intuition, but never enough to truly see you. He didn't break down the door. He didn't need to. All it took was for you to keep the door open too long in the name of kindness, in the name of hope, in the name of loyalty. And in that open door, the darkness found space to root itself. You felt it, didn't you? That moment your soul quietly stepped back without explanation. The way you smiled less often when they entered the room. The way your body tensed even when they said nothing. That wasn't paranoia, Sagittarius. That was your inner light recognizing the presence of something that couldn't be trusted. There are people who never yell, but whose silence cuts deeper than cruelty. There are those who never strike, but who dismantle your spirit piece by piece through omission, dismissal, or cold detachment. The one who hurt you may never have thrown a blow, but they left wounds. Invisible ones. Lingering ones. The kind that made you question your worth not through insults but through absence. And what's most chilling is that you once trusted them. You let them in during your most sacred season. You showed them the unfiltered parts of yourself. The dreams you barely told anyone. The soft ache in your voice when you remembered your past. The trembling hope that maybe, just maybe, this connection would be different. But it wasn't. They saw your openness and misunderstood it for weakness. They mistook your generosity for something to consume, not to cherish. And slowly, without realizing it, you began to dim. Sagittarius, you've always been strong. But your strength isn't in walls or fire. It's in your willingness to believe, to forgive, to try again. And that is precisely what made you vulnerable to the kind of harm that doesn't leave bruises but leaves you second-guessing your own heart. The hired one, the one whose energy was sent to undo you, didn't need to pull you down. He only needed to plant a seed of doubt. A seed that said, "You are too much. You ask for too much. You feel too deeply." And once that seed took root, the rest was easy. You began apologizing for your emotions, shrinking your light, minimizing your needs. Not because you wanted to, but because some part of you believed it would help the connection survive. But it didn't. Because nothing healthy survives in a space where only one soul is breathing, and the other is consuming. Perhaps now, as you sit with these words, your memory is awakening. You're remembering the nights you cried without understanding why. The mornings you woke up feeling drained, even after a full night's sleep. The way you excused their behavior over and over, even when it felt like a slow suffocation. You tried so hard to be the bigger person, didn't you? You told yourself they were going through something, that they didn't mean it, that if you could just be patient they'd return to who they were. But Sagittarius, the person you were waiting for never existed. You fell in love with the light you imagined in them, not the shadow they continually brought into your space. And that's not your fault. It's the cost of being someone who sees potential before proof. Let me tell you a story. There was once a young woman who loved with all her heart. She had a partner who never raised a hand, never spoke cruelly, but every time she celebrated something important to her, he changed the subject. Every time she opened up about her pain, he grew silent. Every time she needed emotional warmth, he offered logic and distance. Over time she stopped celebrating. She stopped sharing. She stopped needing. And one day, she looked in the mirror and didn't recognize herself. Her light had gone somewhere, but not forever. Because the moment she acknowledged the quiet erosion of her spirit, the moment she said out loud, "This is not love," she began to return. That woman, Sagittarius, is in all of us. And her story is yours. The darkness you encountered was never stronger than your light. It was just more practiced at pretending. But no matter how clever, no matter how long it lingered, it could not fully extinguish the fire within you. And that is why you're here. That is why you're reading this now. Because something in you is stirring again. Something that says, I deserve more than silent harm. I deserve a life where I don't have to explain my needs away. I deserve a connection that sees me fully. And you do. This is not about revenge. This is about release. About finally naming what happened, not to dwell in it, but to rise from it. The person who came into your life like a shadow was not a random event. They were a mirror. They were a test. They were the final threshold before your awakening. And they failed to break you because your soul remembered the truth, even when your mind forgot. You were not sent here to be devoured by darkness. You were sent here to illuminate it. If there is still pain in your chest, let it speak. Let it say what it was never allowed to. Let it cry, not because you are falling apart, but because you are falling free. You don't need to be loud to reclaim your power. You just need to be honest. The one who entered your life to undo you has no authority here anymore. Their shadow may have lingered, but your light was never dependent on their understanding. You don't need to protect them with your silence anymore. You don't need to carry the shame of their choices. This is your threshold, Sagittarius. The point where the old story ends and the real one begins. The one where you are no longer the background character in someone else's drama. The one where you rise not in fury but in quiet clarity. And in this rising the darkness cannot follow. Gate 2. The one who paid him wasn't holding money, they were holding your soul. Sagittarius, sometimes the most painful betrayal does not come from the one who struck the blow. It comes from the hand that handed them the weapon. And that's what you're feeling now. Not just the sting of what someone did to you, but the weight of realizing who allowed it. Who stood by. Who turned their back on your pain. It wasn't always a stranger. In fact, it rarely is. More often, it's someone who knew your story. Someone who once said they loved you. Someone who looked into your eyes and swore they'd never hurt you. But love, when corrupted, can become the most dangerous currency. And it was your love, your trust, your loyalty that paid the price for someone else's silence. You're beginning to see that now, aren't you? That the one who let the darkness into your life didn't break down the gates. They simply left them open and walked away. And while the world saw nothing wrong, your spirit kept score. Every moment you bit your tongue instead of speaking truth. Every time you made yourself smaller to keep the peace. Every time you convinced yourself to forgive, even when the apology never came. These weren't just small wounds. They were sacrifices. And you made them thinking that love would repay you. But love, true love, does not ask you to bleed for it endlessly. There is something that happens when a soul like yours is betrayed by someone you trusted with everything. First you question them, but eventually you begin to question yourself. You start wondering if maybe it was your fault. Perhaps you were too sensitive, too emotional, too much. You replay every conversation trying to pinpoint where you went wrong. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin to doubt your own voice. That is how spiritual theft works, not through violence but through erosion. They didn't just take your trust. They took your clarity. They left you wandering through a fog of self-blame. And you carried that fog for longer than anyone knows. Sagittarius, I want you to hear this clearly. You were not wrong to love. You were not wrong to believe. You were not wrong to let someone in. But what you were never taught, what no one told you, is that your love is sacred and sacred things must be protected. Not hidden. Not locked away. But honored. Treated with reverence. You opened your soul like a sun-drenched window, and someone walked through with muddy feet. They didn't mean to ruin you perhaps, but they didn't stop either. And that is what matters now. Intentions may be cloudy, but patterns are always crystal clear. Let me tell you a story, Sagittarius. There was once a man who loved his brother more than anything. He looked up to him. He defended him. He sacrificed for him. And even when that brother lied, manipulated, took what wasn't his, the man continued to believe. One day everything fell apart. The brother vanished with the inheritance their father left behind. And the man was left with nothing. But what hurt most wasn't the money. It was the memory of all the times he ignored his own intuition. All the times he felt something wasn't right but silenced it. Because he wanted love more than he wanted truth. And when he finally stood in that truth, the grief nearly swallowed him. But only nearly. Because from that very place he rose. Not bitter but awake. He rebuilt not just his life but his boundaries. That man was once a victim. But now, he's the guardian of his own peace. You're like that man. You've paid far too much for the presence of people who never intended to stay. You've handed out parts of yourself as currency in relationships where love was conditional. And the time has come to call it what it is, not because you want revenge but because you want peace. You were the one who kept the door open, yes. But that doesn't mean you deserved what entered. Love without boundaries becomes self-abandonment. And that's what you're healing from now, the habit of abandoning yourself to keep others close. The one who paid the higher darkness into your life was not necessarily evil. Sometimes they were broken. Sometimes they were carrying their own wounds. But here's the truth. It is not your job to be their healer when you are bleeding. It is not your responsibility to absorb the consequences of someone else's unhealed shadow. And it is not noble to suffer in silence, hoping that love will redeem the ones who keep harming you. Sagittarius, you are not here to save people who keep drowning you. You are here to remember your fire. To remember that your soul is not a sanctuary for other people's chaos. You are here to reclaim the parts of yourself you once gave away out of fear, out of longing, out of the desperate hope that this time, someone would finally stay. But what if you've been the one holding the key all along? What if the one who needed to stay was you? When you finally see who handed over your peace in exchange for comfort, familiarity, or approval, it can shatter something inside. But that shattering is sacred. It breaks the illusion that you must continue paying for belonging. It breaks the belief that being kind means being quiet. It breaks the chains you didn't even know were wrapped around your voice. And in their place, something new begins to rise. The soft, unshakable power of self-trust. You don't need to prove anyone wrong. You don't need to make them admit what they did. What you need is to feel your feet on the ground again. To breathe in the truth that you did not deserve to be sacrificed for someone else's comfort. You need to forgive yourself for staying too long, for loving too hard, for not walking away sooner. And when you do, the fog begins to lift. The currency of your soul returns to your own hands. And you no longer pay to be seen, to be heard, to be loved. You are no longer for sale, Sagittarius. Your worth is not up for debate. And your peace is not a bargaining chip. The one who paid for the darkness may never apologize. But you can set yourself free by choosing not to pay for it anymore. From this moment on, your soul is the only one who signs the contract of who gets access to your heart. Gate 3. The soul that loves you never left. You've always been connected. Sagittarius, some love stories are not written in the pages of time, but in the spaces between lifetimes. They are not bound by the physical world, nor are they broken by endings. You may have thought that the bond you once felt with someone has been severed, perhaps by loss, by silence, by betrayal. But if you listen closely in the quiet spaces between your thoughts, you will hear a truth your soul has never stopped whispering. The connection remains. There is someone who has walked with you through more than one lifetime. Someone who knew you before you had a name. Someone whose energy feels like a distant melody you can't quite place, but that moves you to tears without needing a single word. This connection may have once existed in the form of a partner, a parent, a friend, or perhaps it never fully arrived in this life. And yet, the ache has been constant. Not because you've lost them, but because your soul remembers them even when your mind does not. Have you ever met someone and felt like you've known them forever? Or lost someone and felt as if a part of you was being torn from the inside out? That's not imagination, Sagittarius. That's soul memory. And while the world asks you to move on, Your spirit knows better. Because soul bonds cannot be dissolved by time, distance, or death. They are written into the fabric of your being. And when the time is right, they rise again, not to haunt you but to heal you. There's a sacred kind of love that exists beyond possession. It doesn't demand, it doesn't cling, it simply remains. And this is the kind of love you are waking up to now. A love that doesn't need to be seen to be real. One that guides you quietly from the unseen realm, lighting your path even when you feel alone. This soul doesn't speak in words. They speak in energy, in synchronicities, in dreams, in the sudden stillness that overcomes you in the middle of your day. Sometimes they come to you in moments when you're close to giving up. Sometimes in the middle of a song, or a flicker of light across your wall, or a breath you didn't know you were holding. They come because you called silently, unconsciously, but with the longing only a soul can carry. You may not know their name anymore, but your soul does. And in the deepest part of you, something lights up when you remember that love like this cannot be lost. It can be misunderstood. It can be misdirected, but it cannot die. Let me tell you a story, Sagittarius. There was once a woman who fell deeply in love with someone she couldn't explain. They met briefly, only for a short season, but the connection was immediate, intense, and inexplicably familiar. And when the relationship ended abruptly, it shattered her. Not because of what was said or done, but because of what wasn't. The soul-level recognition that was never put into words. For years she carried the pain like a quiet echo. No closure. No clear beginning or end. Just a hollow ache that wouldn't leave. Until one day during meditation she saw a vision. It wasn't a dream. It was a memory, not from this life but another. She saw the same soul holding her hand, promising to return. And in that moment she understood this was not about now. This was about something far older, far deeper. That woman wept, not from grief, but from the profound relief that what she felt had always been real, and that she was never abandoned. She was simply being reminded that love does not obey the laws of time. Sagittarius, you carry this kind of soul memory too. You are not crazy for feeling what others don't understand. You are not weak for holding on to what others have forgotten. You are simply tuned to a deeper frequency, the kind of frequency that picks up on vibrations from another world. And the soul that loves you? They know. They've been watching. They've been waiting. Not to return in the form you once knew, but to awaken you to a higher form of love. One that begins with your connection to yourself. Because the truth is, Sagittarius, the person who hurt you may have distorted your view of love. They may have made you think that love equals pain, equals waiting, equals sacrifice. But the soul that truly loves you, the one that never left, is here to show you something entirely different. That love can be gentle. That connection can be safe. That you don't have to chase what's meant for you. You only have to remember it. This soul may be part of your future. They may be part of your past. They may already be beside you in a form you didn't expect. But wherever they are, their energy is reaching you now, calling you back to your own light. Because the greatest connection you will ever experience is the one that happens when your soul finally feels safe enough to return to itself. You've been giving pieces of yourself away for years, Sagittarius, trying to earn love, trying to hold on to people who were never meant to stay. But now something is shifting. You are being invited to stop searching outward and start listening inward. Because the soul that loves you, they are not outside of you. They are woven into your own becoming. And when you begin to trust that, truly trust it, something miraculous happens. You stop chasing and you start attracting. You stop doubting and you start remembering. You stop surviving and you begin to feel alive again. Close your eyes. Take a deep breath. Place your hand over your heart and say, I remember. That's all. Just those 2 words. Because in truth, you've always known. And the one who loves you, they've never stopped saying it in return. Gate 4. You are not being punished, you are being set free. Sagittarius, the world may have taught you to see your pain as punishment. That the betrayals you endured were somehow deserved, that your softness was a flaw, and that your suffering was the consequence of being too open, too trusting to you. But that is not the truth. You were never being punished. You were being prepared for something sacred, something higher, something only a soul like yours could carry. This wasn't cruelty, it was an invitation to wake up, To unlearn every false belief that told you your worth had to be earned, that your presence had to be proven, that your love had to be paid for with pieces of your own soul. You've walked through darkness not because you were forsaken, but because the light within you was so powerful, it terrified those who had not yet found their own. You were left behind not because you were unworthy, but because your soul refused to be chained. And every loss, every silence, every unanswered question has been clearing the path. Not away from your purpose but toward it. Because the truth is, Sagittarius, you were never meant to live a small, safe life. You were born to awaken, to rise, to burn away illusion and walk in your own sacred fire. There may have been times you doubted everything, times you thought the pain would break you, when you lay awake at night asking the universe, why? And no answer came. But the answer was always there. In the strength that kept you breathing, in the whisper of intuition that told you to keep going, in the small miracles that arrived just when you were about to give up. You were never alone. You were being carried, not away from the life you wanted, but toward the life your soul was always destined to live. And yes, awakening hurts. It hurts because it asks you to release everything you once held as true. It asks you to let go of the versions of yourself you created just to survive. It asks you to stand in your own light, even when others walk away from it. It's not an easy path. But Sagittarius, it's the only path that leads to real freedom. The kind of freedom that doesn't depend on anyone else seeing you. The kind that doesn't crumble when others don't applaud. The kind that rises from within and radiates outward. Calm, certain, unstoppable. Let me share a story with you. There was a man who had been abandoned over and over again. By friends, by lovers, even by his own family. And every time it happened, he told himself it must be his fault. That something inside him was broken. That if he could just fix himself, he would finally be loved the way he longed to be. Years passed and his heart grew heavy, until one day he stopped. Not out of despair but out of clarity. He realized he had never truly been seen because he had spent his life trying to be someone else's version of worthy. And the moment he gave up trying to be chosen, he chose himself. That was the beginning of his real life. Not the life others approved of, but the life his soul had been calling for all along. That man now lives in quiet peace. Not because his life is perfect but because he no longer abandons himself. That is where you are now, Sagittarius. Standing on the edge of your own liberation. You can feel it, can't you? The shedding, the rawness, the strange mix of grief and hope. You may not know what comes next, but something inside you knows it won't be a repetition of the past. Because this time you're different. You no longer need to be chosen to feel whole. You no longer need to be understood to feel valid. You no longer need to be needed to feel safe. You are returning to yourself. And that return, that sacred remembering, is the very essence of awakening. You may look back one day and see the patterns with new eyes. The people who walked away. The lessons that repeated. The pain that forced you to stop and feel. And you'll realize, none of it was a mistake. All of it led you here. Not to the end but to the beginning. The beginning of living without apology. The beginning of honoring your light without shrinking. The beginning of walking through life without the weight of false responsibility. Because the truth is, you never had to prove your worth. You were born worthy. You never had to earn love. You are love. So breathe, Sagittarius. Not because it's over, but because it's finally beginning. You are not here to carry burdens that were never yours. You are not here to replay old grief. You are not here to be defined by the darkness you've survived. You are here to rise, to live, to trust, and to love again, not because you forget what happened but because you finally remember who you are. The pain you felt was never punishment. It was purification. It burned away the parts of you that were never truly yours. And what remains now is gold, untouched, untamed, unbreakable. This is your time. Not to fight, not to convince, but to be. To live in your truth, to stand in your light, and to know deep in your bones that you were never broken. You were becoming. Conclusion. You were never the target. You were the light they couldn't dim. Sagittarius, if you've made it here, I want you to take a deep breath. Not the kind that simply fills your lungs, but the kind that reaches your soul. Because you've just walked through a sacred fire. One that revealed not only the wounds others left behind, but the strength you never knew was already inside you. You have faced truths that many avoid for a lifetime. You've looked back into the shadows and refused to be consumed. And most importantly, you've remembered what the world tried to make you forget: that your light has always been your protection. What tried to harm you never truly stood a chance. Not because you were untouchable, but because even when you were shattered, you still shimmered. You still chose grace over retaliation. You still loved even when you weren't loved back. And that, Sagittarius, is what set you apart. It's what called the angels near. It's what brought divine protection, not in dramatic thunder, but in quiet interventions. In small moments where your soul was carried when your body could barely move. You weren't abandoned. You were being led. The pain was never meant to define you. It was meant to refine you. Like gold in the fire, you've been stripped of false beliefs, broken illusions, and soul contracts that no longer serve you. And now what remains is truth. Radiant, unshakable, eternal truth. You are not someone to be pitied. You are not someone to be fixed. You are someone who walked through the worst and still kept your softness. Who cried in silence and still chose to protect others. Who was nearly destroyed but never ever defeated. So here at the edge of this journey, I ask you not to look for justice in the world's eyes, but to feel the justice already alive in your own spirit. You made it through. And because of that, peace belongs to you now, not borrowed, not begged for, not conditional. It is your birthright. If this message has reached you, if your soul feels seen, I gently invite you to honor this moment. Like this video if your heart found its reflection here. Share it with someone whose light deserves to be remembered. And subscribe to Zodiac Wisdom, where we don't just talk about the stars, we help you remember that you are made of them. Sagittarius, this is not the end of your story. It's the beginning of a chapter written not in fear, but in freedom. May you walk forward with a heart unburdened, a voice unshaken, and a light so steady that no shadow dares to remain.